Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast from Phoenix in Arizona, the USA, of course, Brian Bogert, who is an amazing chap. He's transformed his profound personal adversities into a professional mission to help others live more authentically and impactfully. I really love that. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Brian. It's a real privilege to have you here as my guest.
I'm excited to be here, Jürgen. It's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, and Jeff Giannocovo from episode 615 of the podcast, he introduced us and suggested that we should have a conversation. So big hello to Jeff.
Jeff's an awesome guy, and I'm grateful for the connection.
Excellent. Now, as I kind of alluded to, you've turned incredible personal challenges into opportunities to help others, which is always inspiring when I see somebody do that and turn that around and kind of get out of that victim mode. So I'm looking forward to chatting about all of those things with you today. But before we do that, what's the core impact you're aiming to make in the world, Brian?
So, our stated mission is to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible by reducing the level of suffering that exists on this planet, largely of which I believe exists internal. Now, that's the broad scope, right? That's not exactly
Yeah.
how it's going to come out in every case. But if I look at my reason for existence that drives a lot of that, I believe that the whole reason I'm on this planet is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs. See, I know what it's like to be disconnected, unworthy, actually devalued and shut down in so many cases. I know what it's like to be the only one in almost every room I walk into. I know what it's like to be misjudged and viewed through other people's lenses of what they can't see in themselves in you. Right. And so many of these other same narratives that relate to all of us in our own unique experiences. But at the end of the day, I am somebody who's on a mission to allow people to step fully into their power and potential, and sometimes give themselves permission for the first time in their lives to do that so that they can create joy, freedom, and fulfillment and live based on who they are versus who the world has told them who to be.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. Now, a lot of what you spoke about there is, as you said, internal. It's kind of mindset related, and it's the stories that we tell ourselves. We believe we're not worthy. We believe we don't belong. We believe we're not loved. I think they're the core themes. When like you had an accident early on in your childhood, and people can read about that on your website, read about your story. How did you cultivate this mindset that was resilient enough to overcome the issues that accident caused for you, and then ongoing challenges that you had?
Yeah, so I do think it's important to slow down and just at least acknowledge briefly what happened, and I'll give you the answer to that because the mindset was the focus for a long time, but my mindset was also what disconnected me later in life, and so it's really important to understand the dynamics that go into this. I'm not going to give the full story, but for those of you that are listening, you can find me on 700 plus other podcasts. You can find my story all over the place. But for you, those of you that are listening, when I was 7, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn from my body. It was reattached. I had 24 surgeries, years of recovery. Okay. Now, I want to pause real quick when I say that because what I want everyone to hear is I realize how unique my story is. But what
Hmm.
I've also realized in all these years is how unique every one of our stories are. And what's important is that we learn to pause and recognize the stories we can extract from our stories so we can become intentional in how we apply those moving forward. See, here's the reality. I went into mindset and mental toughness by virtue of survival. Why? Because when I came
Yeah.
out of the hospital, I had a teddy bear in between my arm because it had to heal at 90 degrees. And I was always cute. I've always been loud. And I've always had this level of like magnetism around me. So inevitably, people would come up to me and ask me, "What happened to you, Brian?"
Hmm.
And they would be expecting me to say something like, "Well, I was racing my brother down the street on our bikes, or I flew off the jungle gym, or whatever," right? A normal 7-year-old story. But I'd look them deadpan in the eye and say I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. So here's what happened. 99% of people would pause and they'd turn to my parents for validation, which told me
Hmm.
what? They didn't see me. They didn't understand me. They didn't believe
Yeah.
me. My own
Yeah.
truth that I'm living and existing in, they didn't even believe, right? And my parents would obviously always validate it, but I started to believe early that no one was going to believe my own story. And then those same people would view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately limiting me and telling me all these other things I wasn't going to be able to do. And so that was my real time experience as I'm getting out of the hospital and trying to regain traction in my life. But what did I hear? If you've got a good mindset, if you're mentally tough, you can do anything. So that's what I did. I went into my head and I formalized all these firm thoughts around what I was going to do and how I wasn't going to be a victim. But here was the narrative that was attached to it. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And that served me really well for a long time. And I did. I absolutely shattered other people's expectations. What I now know is I really was also shattering my own. Okay. And so that mindset served me really, really well. I learned how to mountain bike. I don't have a tricep. I don't have a lat, right? Like I got really, really good at it. I learned to get up on water skis with one arm out of the ground. And I was a tennis pro teaching and playing at age 15. I don't say any of this to brag. I say it to say it shattered people's expectations. And when I would throw a ball up in the air, for those that are seeing this on video, guess what? I don't have a tricep. So my arm would flop, but I would also have a 120 mile an hour serve. Mindset and mental toughness are a critical portion of the equation. I used to think it was everything, but I realized, like I said, that it was something that ultimately bit me. And it opened me to actually start to understand that it's not just mindset and mental toughness. There's other integrated pieces of healing that we also need to acknowledge and pay attention to.
And that realization that, and I guess a lot of that was doing it yourself, sort of kind of closing off to all kinds of relationships. And in some ways that's understandable from the point of view, because one of the things you didn't mention in those reactions from those parents, I'm sure you got a few of, you should do more of this, or here's my advice to you, from somebody who hasn't lived through your experience, and so that probably reinforced that I've got to do it myself because they don't understand what I'm going through or what I've been through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also, I was also somebody that, grew up in a house where there was one right way to do everything. So compounded on top of that, right, I consider myself, and just like many other high performers that I work with, right, I learned early in life to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, which meant it was contingent upon what I did or how I showed up in the world versus who I was. And it did serve me well. And I was able to do a lot of epic things early in life, but to your point, it disconnected me. And that's when I started to realize I was about 20. I went down on a snowboarding injury, re-broke my left arm, and went 10 months with it hanging by my side and went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me. That was when I started to realize the flawed nature of my mental toughness and my mindset, because I was alone, surrounded by people, but completely alone. And needing help, and having been someone who had provided so much help and assistance to so many others, I couldn't understand why I was alone. Why was nobody there to help me, right? And I really got resentful, a little bit angry in the very beginning, until I slowed down long enough to realize that the world just bought into the power of my own narrative. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. Now they added a 5th narrative to it that I didn't know until years later, which was, oh, and Brian will ask for help if he needs it. But see, I found myself so disconnected in that state that in one of my most vulnerable, depressed periods as an adult, I didn't have the courage to ask for help. And so that's what shifted a whole lot of things for me to start to realize and value the importance of human connection. And that was kind of the beginning of my unpacking journey, even though it got a lot deeper later, as it really evolved much more exponentially about another 10 years after that.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that asking for help piece, because from what you described in terms of the home and the values that were instilled in you from home and the validation through performance and achievement and accolades and so on, I lived through that kind of experience as well, and and I still struggle today to ask for help.
By the way, so do so many of the high performers I work with. Because again, what I'm trying to highlight is the elements of my story that are relatable because of the human experience that we all go through, right? We all feel this way. We've all been on the receiving end of some of those situations like I just talked about, people not seeing us, understanding us, believing our stories, limiting us, or telling us all the things we should or shouldn't be doing, right? Like, I haven't met a human who hasn't had some element of that exist in their life that impacted them for a period of their life.
Yeah, I'm curious, because I often have to catch myself. I think, I'm struggling with something. Why isn't why aren't these people that I'm connected to reaching out to me and say, "Can I help you?" And often I find myself telling the story that they don't care about me, or they don't
Mhm.
care that this is happening to me. Whereas that's not the case, because they're telling themselves the story. If Jürgen needs help, he'll ask for it, right?
Yeah,
Same as
that's
what you
right.
said before. And then I have to, but I still have to force myself to ask for help. How did
Mhm.
you cultivate that kind of vulnerability that allows you to say, well, Brian's still strong, Brian's still capable,
Mhm.
Brian's still a high achiever, but Brian's struggling with this particular thing right now, and I'm going to ask for help?
Yeah. Yeah. I would tell you I'm still cultivating it. I wouldn't tell you I have it 100% figured out. I've been saying this a lot recently. I've been flexing my asking for help muscle as frequently as I possibly can. And I've been in a process of learning to receive and existing in receivership as a result of it. To your point, though, I lived so much of my life in a place where I wasn't asking for help. Or, great example, right? Someone would offer me help and I wouldn't accept it.
Mm,
Even in situations where I didn't need to ask, I often would skirt it and just
yeah.
defer it because I also didn't want to be a burden to others, right? I was also the guy that always picked up the check in every place I ever went, even though somebody who probably had more resources than me would often be sitting at the table and willing to do it, but I would fight because I needed to be the one, right? I blocked myself from all of these places of really receiving and for asking for help. I'll tell you the part that started it the most, and I've just continued to lean further and further in. I have asked for help in some respects my whole life, but not anything to the degree of what I'm trying to do today. I asked one of my mentors 3 or 4 years ago. I said, "What's one of my biggest blind spots?" And by the way, I don't know. Is your show? Can I cuss on your show?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
I try to be respectful, but I also like fuck is like in my normal vocabulary, so I sometimes have to like really give some caveat. But he literally, that was what he said. He's like, Brian, you're fucking shitty at receiving, and he hit me between the eyeballs with a 2x4, and I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, Brian, he said, I've witnessed you now for a long period of time. He said, you've done so many epic things. You've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. You've created all these organizations in the philanthropic sense. You do all these things to help other people. And he said, and I've witnessed you ask for anything from anyone with zero fear if you perceive it's going to benefit other people. The second you perceive it's going to benefit you, you don't ask. And what I've been getting into the process of realizing is that when I don't ask, I'm actually doing others a disservice by not giving them the opportunity to give.
Hmm.
See, part of living in abundance is recognizing that to give is to receive. And it's literally a movement and a flow of energy just like anything else. Every time I was offered help from someone and I said, "No, that's okay, I got it." I blocked their ability to give and my energetic ability to receive because I was literally shutting it off. And so every time I'm in a position where I will notice that unconscious reaction to hesitate, downplay, or defer the help that's right in front of me, I'm flexing that muscle by actually leaning in and realizing I need to be asking more in this moment than any other time, right? And I'm also opening myself by really allowing the receiving to take place. But I've always given. I've given abundantly. I've had this philosophy on giving until it hurts since I can remember, which means I give even when I don't have to give time, energy, resources, money, relationships, right? However, I never received abundantly. I've made massive amounts of money. I've had success in lots of places, but I also was largely disconnected. And so I'm still curating it. But just like how I realized I was suppressing emotion when I had shut things off for so many years, it's about allowing the second you notice that trigger or that reaction that is activated at a cellular, visceral level, right? That 99% of the time, it has nothing to do with what's right in front of us. And so if we can center ourselves in the present moment and open ourselves to receive all of the blessings that are surrounding us from anyone at any time without worrying about hierarchy, competition, or value, but just the human experience and existence that we all want and desire, then asking for help and receiving starts to become much easier.
Yeah, and I love that reframe, because for somebody that is so strong on giving, even to the point of detriment to themselves, if it's only this is only going to benefit me, to reframe it in I'm giving this person the opportunity
Yeah.
to give or to help.
You
Very
just reminded
powerful.
me, I didn't say one of the most critical parts that my mentor said. I left off a part of it because I got into a different pathway, but I want to come back because what you just said sparked it. What he said, though, is he said, Brian, what I know about you is that the way you live your life, anything that benefits you is going to benefit everyone around you. And so he said, every time you're not asking for help and every time you're not opening yourself to receive, you're actually limiting the amount of impact you can have in the world. And that was the dynamic that flipped the switch for me. I did hear him say I was shitty at receiving, but what I didn't connect the dots on before is, as such an adamant, prolific, abundant giver, I actually wasn't going to be able to give at the level that I would be capable of if I actually allowed myself to ask for help and receive as well.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And human connection is such a big thing. I mean, in terms of helping other people, there's skills and expertise you can bring in by asking experts in those areas for help. That's kind of at a fairly superficial level, but then asking for help on a personal level it just takes that deeper. And I guess you can practice that in those kind of levels, right?
You can practice it in multiple different levels, and I think that, to your point exactly, there's an element of hiring somebody or getting a formal mentor for sake in certain skill sets, applications, or wisdom that we want to gain. But there's also asking for help in little moments that I'm even rehearsing and flexing as well, like in my household, right? I suffered from shame and anger at such a deep level that isn't existent in my world in the same way anymore, but it would show up something like this. My wife would ask something as simple as this: hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend? But my shame and my anger filter would cause me to hear it this way: hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend? And then I'd react and I'd rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last few days to show her I'm a good husband and father. Why? Because I'm defending the fact that being a good husband and father is important to me, right? Even though that wasn't at all what she asked, right? Asking for help can also be something as simple as this, where if I get triggered today, I can reframe and say something to the degree of, hey, honey, I just got triggered by what you said, which tells me that I didn't quite hear you correctly. Could you help me and please restate it? And I'll try to hear it through a more neutral lens. And if I'm not capable of doing so, maybe we can pause this and revisit it later so I don't create damage, right? Or with my son, who was wanting me to do something with him the other day, but it was also something. Oh, I know exactly what it was. I'll give you the situation. He had a school situation at Peter Piper Pizza. Peter Piper Pizza puts me on sensory overload in about 4 seconds. For those of you who don't know what Peter Piper Pizza is in the States, it is like arcade, craziness, noise in a pizza facility, and it's just like all condensed and everything reverberates off itself. Every time I go to one of those things, I'm like within minutes on overload, right? And I was on the tail end of carrying a really heavy week. And so what did I say to my son? Buddy, I will do anything to try to give you the experiences in life that you want. But I also need to tell you, I've had a really challenging week. And when I go to those places, they put me on sensory overload, which means that I'm not going to be the best version of me to be able to support you and make sure that you have a good experience, right? I'd like to either try to prioritize this and find a way to have one of your friends or mom take you, or maybe we can just skip this and you and I can go do something special and we'll find another way to get back with your friends later. My son's 10. But what am I doing? I'm owning my truth real time and communicating that even the idea of going into that environment causes enough anxiety for me to not want to be there, right? It does. I know this. It's resonant memory. Now, do I have the ability to calm myself, neutralize, and go there for my son? Of course I do, and I have many times. But I wasn't in a state to do that last week. My 10-year-old was like, Dad, and by the way, my son has special needs. He's on the autism spectrum, also has sensory processing disorder, generalized anxiety, and ADHD. So he personally understands this real time. And he said, Dad, I totally get it. Thank you so much for communicating with me. He said, I'm good skipping it for now. He said, because I ultimately wanted to do something fun with you. It was less about going to Peter Piper Pizza. Now, what could I have done in any other situation? Not asked for help and found myself forced into an environment with a situation that was going to not be as fun for him or for me. But instead, I was able to ask my 10-year-old for help because, again, it wasn't about competition or hierarchy. It was about who we are as humans.
Yeah. And I mean, there's another level to that, isn't there? You're modeling behavior for him that is going to help him in the future. And sounds like he's a very clever boy, and will probably have a huge impact in the world as well. And that's having that skill will just magnify that impact.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we just try to live congruent. And, we know that no matter what, we are likely doing unconscious things that are going to create damage and disconnect for our kids. Like every other parent who's always done it with the best level of intent that they possibly can and whatever, talents and resources they have.
Yeah.
We're just trying to allow ourselves to evolve and to do the best we can to break the generational patterns that have, held shackles on not just myself, but other generations in our family. We're hoping to give them a greater opportunity to do so than, we were given.
The idea, and I mean, Brené Brown is very strong on this, that vulnerability, changing the common perception, I guess, of vulnerability as a weakness in leadership or as a weakness in character or whatever. And of course, she talks about shame and owning shame, which kind of underpins that in some ways. What's your take on changing that mindset that vulnerability is actually a really powerful leadership skill?
Yeah, first I want to just acknowledge Brene Brown is a legend in shame research. And I will tell you that she was the one who was able to give me access to enough language to realize that I was even dealing with shame. So I'm going to answer that part, and then I'm going to answer your other question because I think it's important to highlight this. Shame, most people think is just I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough. That's one talk track, which is also why I didn't identify with it, because though I've had moments there in my life, that wasn't my predominant narrative. The other is when you shut that down, you show up in the arena and you're ready to go to battle. It's who do you think you are? See, everything major in my life I felt the need to apologize for and pull the throttle back on in my life. But to answer the question around vulnerability, I believe, and I state this today, that true strength actually hides behind vulnerability, right? And if we look at the human experience and the way that we talk about it, I think we all seek and desire four things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected. We all want to feel seen and understood. And we all want to feel connected. But the second we walk into an environment that we don't feel seen and understood or protected and safe, what do? We tend to protect ourselves. So that might be a networking event where everyone's handing out business cards and they want something from you instead of for you. It could be going back to your family's house for a holiday, and you know that your aunt and your dad and your grandpa are going to all look at you and make you feel a certain way, and you start dreading it weeks before you even get there and your armor starts going up. But what happens when we don't feel those things? We protect ourselves. So I like to think about this through the lens of, we talk about the trash from people's past, those 35-gallon black trash bags for an outdoor bin. If you unfold one, don't put it in the can, but you grab onto each corner and it's just this big rectangle. Now you hold it up in front of your face. That's your armor. That's what you're using to protect yourself. It's just invisible for most of us, right? But if we're holding this up in front of us, now the question becomes, how could you properly expect anyone in your life, your spouse, your kids, your clients, your team who works and reports to you, to see you and understand you, know what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your heart, your soul, your intent, your desires, your boundaries, delivered through an opaque force field? And that's assuming that they're not carrying their own that's going to further dilute the message.
That's
right?
Yeah.
That armor is to protect ourselves because we are afraid of being vulnerable, right? Because so much of our life has been focused around criticism, judgment, shame that's made us feel worse about ourselves. And we don't want to expose ourselves to that, right? So we protect ourselves. That armor is what I was carrying when my wife would say something that simple. But what did it also do? It diluted the message of what I was hearing. So the second we protect ourselves, we actually guarantee we're going to disconnect ourselves from who we are and what we want most, which is to be seen and understood and to be connected. And so we teach this concept of what we call a protector and a connector. which is utilizing the concept of vulnerability to be able to ensure that everyone gets what they need. So what does that look like? A protector and a connector is somebody who has the ability to lower their own armor, regardless of the environment that they're in, and wrap a layer of protection around the entire environment, and lead with vulnerability in a way that ensures that everybody is safe, protected, seen, understood, and connected. But what does it require of us? It requires that we have what I call a strong spine and a soft front. A strong spine means I've done enough work to heal, to understand who I am, so that I know who I am, what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do. And I have nothing to defend, justify, or anything, which means that I can be unwavering in any environment. It's kind of like that last scene from the movie 8 Mile with Eminem. I don't know if you've seen it or if any of the listeners have, but he goes off on this battle, in this rap battle, and he literally reps off every negative thing that's ever happened to him, all the stuff, all the ammunition that the guy that he's competing with was going to use against him, and he essentially drops the mic. Why? Because there's nothing you can throw at me that I haven't already thrown out, because I'm owning it based on who I am. When we get to that place, it allows us to have that soft front. We don't need to protect any longer. And I like to think of my wife and my kids in this scenario. If my kids want to be seen, understood, they want to come to dad for love, leadership, light, to be consoled, do they want to be around me or to put their head down on a metal chest piece of armor? No. They want to feel my flesh. And so strong spine, soft front is legitimately utilizing the concept of I have to stand in my truth and in my vulnerability real time, because if I've done enough work to know myself and to heal those pieces, I don't have anything to defend, justify, or hide behind. I can be completely open, which also opens me to receive, but it also opens others to connect.
Yeah, that sounds like a very long, and probably it's a lifelong journey of self-reflection and self-awareness. What do you suggest people consider in terms of, let's say somebody's in this place of, oh, that really resonated with me. I go in a lot of places where I feel uncertain, I don't feel safe, I kind of have this barrier up. And the classic one to me, you mentioned the example before of a networking event. I hate networking events because I go into those and I, if I don't know somebody there, that's my safety net. If I know somebody there, I'll go and talk to them and hopefully start to get introduced to other people. But if that's not the case, then I'm very much with the garbage bag in front of me. How do you start that journey or continue that journey, momentum, and sustain that journey throughout life of doing that work on yourself to feel that safety?
Yep. We're not going to have time to go through all of the 5 pillars of waste to wealth, which is totally fine. What I will say is that it starts with awareness. And what I would suggest around awareness is that it's not like every other type of awareness that so much happens in this world, which just makes people more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves. It's an objective and non-judgmental view. And here's why. The trash from your past is not your fault. It just becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it or you start burying others in yours. Why is it not your fault? Because it's generationally inherited, it's literally patterned down, and it's connected to the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that have created a set of beliefs that your life is only further validated. But when I ask people, hey, do you know like when you get triggered, or do you know when your armor goes up, or do you know when you're getting into that defensive or reserved or held back place? Almost everybody knows. They know what that feels like, and they know what it feels like to them, even if it's not as granular as we hopefully get them to understand later. But what does that mean? I go into a networking event and your armor is going up, right? You're going back to your family's house for the holidays and your armor is going up, okay? The first step is to be aware of it, and to be aware of it in a state that, again, you're not judging yourself, that you're getting defensive. It makes sense, it's cellular memory, and it's tied to things that cause you to believe you needed to do so. So that's the first place I start. The second is there's 2 ways to lower your armor. One is the longer, harder version, which I would suggest everyone needs to go through, which is this process of unpacking. It means sitting in your trash long enough until it points you towards what's important. Getting to the source or sources of that trash that's causing the trigger and the resonant memory and cellular memory activation in the first place. Because when you can get to the root source or sources of it, it no longer holds the same power over you, and you spend less and less and less time in it, even if you still get triggered later in life. To your point, there is no final destination, only constant evolution of self.
Yeah.
So I sit here today, not as a sage from a stage, but as a human who experiences this, right? Because I used to live in my low frequency energy and emotion and guarded protective state for months and years at a time. Now it's minutes and moments. I have a hell of a lot more capacity because I've done the work to clear it. That's the first way, and what I would say is the longest, most sustainable way to keep your armor down. The second is to, in a moment, convince yourself you're safe. So you're ultimately fabricating a reality that actually is real, but your body isn't letting you believe that. What do I mean by this? Right? When we get triggered and we walk into that state, or right before you walk into the networking event that you're talking about, you're aware energetically that you already have a little reserve, your armor is already up. So you're aware you're already stepping into that state. No different than a situation like the conversation with my wife where I got triggered. Both are a protective state. And so I'm highlighting both because this is relevant to whether we're walking in to lower it in a moment or whether we get triggered and have to. Okay. There's 3 questions that I ask everybody to ask. Okay. Is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me or the trash from my past? Here's a little hint. 99% of the time, it's the second. Okay. So when you're walking into a networking event, you're reacting to all of the horrible networking events and all the shallow, empty, just slimy elements that you've experienced in those places that have conditioned you to believe that you need to protect yourself there. Right. So the first thing is asking that question is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me or the trash from my past. The second question is, what am I protecting right now? See, for me with my wife, I was protecting the fact that being a good husband and father was extremely important to me. But that's where my defense and my armor was coming from, which is why I couldn't see it clearly. For you, walking into the networking event, you're probably protecting that you don't want to be taken advantage of. You don't want to have people look down on you. You don't want people who only want something from you. You want to build real, genuine relationships. You don't want to be criticized or judged based on things that you can't control because of the surface level nature of the environment. Am I even close to those things for you?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
So again, you're protecting all of these narratives because what happened earlier in life? Well, I've gone to these things and I felt really shitty about myself. I haven't felt worthy. Nothing really has come from it and I've been taken advantage of, right? So now I believe that that's always going to happen that way. So what am I protecting right now? You've got to get to the root of it because that's another way to separate from the moment. And the last, and maybe the most important question, if you haven't found a way to lower your armor and neutralize just from those two, is, am I safe right now? Am I mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually safe? Well, I can look around where I'm at. I can think about what I'm doing. I can walk into this environment. And by the way, 99% of the time in our world today, particularly for first world countries that are largely safe, we're not reacting to anything that's actually challenging our safety.
Yeah.
See, it's something that when we can realize that and recognize that, then what do we get to do? Take a breath. Imagine we're lowering our armor and walk in open.
Yeah, that's great, great outline and a great strategy to use. And as you were talking about that, I thought, well, I remember there was one networking event where I'd gone along and I thought, and I may have done some of this unconsciously. I didn't know the steps and I wasn't aware of these things, but I thought, well, I'm going to make the best use of this time as I possibly can. And I'm just going to ignore the fact that I hardly know anyone here. And I walked in, introduced myself to a few people, and it turns out that the CEO of the organization running the event, who had just been newly appointed, was there. And I happened to find a moment where he was on his own, and I just went up to him and I said, "Congratulations on your appointment. What are some of the things you're hoping to achieve?" So, great conversation starter in that sense, and that actually led to business. And
I'm sure it did.
all I wanted to do was just start a conversation. So there was no expectation, but I kind of let my guard down. And as you said, having the ability to have that conversation, because there was a hook that I could hang it on, rather than, I don't want anything from this person other than just to congratulate him and maybe start a conversation about what he wanted to do with the organization. And that led on to a couple of other conversations that ultimately led to business. Yeah.
But what you just said is a really important factor, because the majority of people are largely reacting unconsciously in most situations, myself included, historically, right? So part of what I'm really helping people do and help them step into is to start to be able to move through a systematic process, the unconscious to the conscious, right? The unaware to the aware, so that we can have more influence and control over each present moment. We don't have control over so many things in life, right? But we can control how present we're being in this current moment, because, oh, by the way, the past is largely diluted in our own memories, and it's skewed. It's not always accurate. The future is almost always fabricated, but the present is the only thing real. So it's allowing ourselves to consciously step into the present moment and allowing ourselves to exist in the only truth that actually happens in our real lives, which is in each present moment.
Yeah. The other situation that this reminded me of, and it's not really something I struggle with, but I'm involved in a lot of speaking groups where people really struggle with public speaking. And I'm always astounded at people who are highly intelligent, very accomplished, highly articulate, and they get up on a stage in front of even a small audience and they kind of collapse into a bumbling jelly on stage. And
it's a huge one. It's a huge one. And I would say that translates as well to even something as simple as video. Right? Like there are so many people that don't want to be on video. They don't want to be in front of the camera. They don't want to be either creating content or utilizing things. But to even the point of what you just focused on, I mean, one of our masterminds is focused on service-based entrepreneurs, ultimately being able to step into those things. And the hesitancy to get on camera is rooted in the same reasons that we protect ourselves walking into networking events. Right? We don't want to be judged, criticized. We don't want to be put down. We're afraid to look silly. We're afraid to have somebody tease us. It's like, well, what if I don't say the right thing? What if I don't do the right thing? Right? But there's all of this hesitation and built up energy that is creating this armor that in most cases, once we start to step through it, we realize that we've been disconnecting ourselves from far much more than just a couple of opportunities, And so a lot of this is about, how do we, again, get ourselves to a place? So whether it's a stage, a virtual stage, or even just filming something on your phone for a small piece of content, the other side of this is to recognize, like, look, only 7% of what we communicate is in the words that we choose. 38% is in the delivery, the tone, and the cadence. 55% is in our nonverbals.
Yeah,
right? And so why that becomes important is, again, being present in front of people or even on video. Again, if we're communicating via text message or email, we're giving people less than 10% of what we're intending to communicate. If we're on the phone or we're on teleconferences, we leave a voicemail, we're giving people still less than 50% of what we intend to communicate. But utilizing video or being able to step on a stage, and in particular doing so in a place where we can align our energy and remove our armor, we're giving people access to 100% of our intent. And here's the reality. The world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will always judge you based on your actions. So wherever the gap exists there between your intent not being seen and understood and received is because of how your actions are delivering it, probably through armor. And so again, if you want more congruence between being received for what you intend and what you desire, change your actions. Step into and realize that dropping that armor and stepping onto stage is really the only way to be seen.
Yeah, that's very powerful advice. And one of the other things I'd add to that is what you said earlier, that reframe of I've got a message that might help somebody. And that message is not going to be much good if it's not delivered in an impactful way where people actually hear it.
That's right. I mean, here's the thing. I talked about wanting to impact suffering, right? And you just hit on the point exactly. I believe that suffering exists in 4 places. It's the things that are left unsaid, the things we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or understand, and the things that are left undone. So to fulfill my existence and reason for being here, to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs, every time I talk about my shame, my anger, almost losing everyone and everything in my life that I cared about because of me, right? The financial loss that I experienced a couple of years ago for the first time ever as an entrepreneur, every time I talk about it, not only is it alleviating suffering from myself because I'm acting and doing and I'm vocalizing it and removing it from the inside, but what am I also doing? I'm giving people permission to feel and say things they wouldn't have otherwise, and words to articulate and understand things in a way that they haven't, to free them to act and do. And so again, through this idea of giving and receiving, anytime I'm not standing in vulnerability and truth, I'm doing a disservice to my entire mission, reason for existence, and everyone around me, because every time I talk, I not only alleviate it for myself, I give others the ability to do it for themselves as well.
Yeah, yeah. That's like there's two parts to it, isn't there? There's that second one is so powerful as well. Wonderful. All right. Well, I could go on talking for ages with you about all these things, and we've probably only just scratched the surface. But I'm just seeing the clock ticking away here. Time flies when you're having fun. I think it's a good point on that note to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the lightning round. I ask of every 5 questions I ask of every guest, and the idea is you'll inspire the listener to go and take some action to make do something awesome as a result of your answer today.
Cool.
You all set?
Yeah, let's do it.
So what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Lean into AI, but I want us to think about what AI does. AI helps us aggregate information. It helps us raise our knowledge, our wisdom, our understanding. It helps us expedite processes and speed things along. I'm not talking about artificial intelligence, though. I'm talking about awareness and intentionality. If you want to be more innovative, you need to raise your level of AI to be more aware and more intentional.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, you had me there for a moment on AI, but yeah, awareness and intentionality. Yeah, I love it. And we've talked about kind of the steps to go through there in being self-aware, and being aware of triggers is the first step probably. But yeah, doing that work on an ongoing basis, and it's a lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. Best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Put myself in environments with other people to spark new ideas and allow myself to get vulnerable in realizing that I don't know it all. Hiring coaches, mentors, being a part of masterminds, and consistently putting myself in a place to allow creativity to flow. I thought most of my life I wasn't a creative person. It's because I was shut off. But what
Yeah.
I also realize is if I allow myself to go there, I give myself permission. I think creativity and new ideas are ultimately one of the greatest expressions of self. So I try to live and foster that in every environment possible.
Yeah, well, there's two aspects to that, isn't there? As sort of we've spoken about the need everyone has for connection, and you've talked there about on a intellectual level, I guess, the need for connection to develop new ideas
Mm-hmm.
and learn from other people, and also contribute to what they're working on,
Mm-hmm.
because often it's like two half ideas come together and form
Yep.
a big idea. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Favorite resource you use most often?
Ooh. Do you want to narrow in the resource piece for me? Are we talking technology? Are we talking anything? Like what in
Could
terms
be
of
anything.
resources?
It's anything. Anything goes.
Okay, so my favorite resource I would say is elements and things that help with nervous system regulation. I believe that nervous system regulation is one of the greatest investments any high performer or entrepreneur can make. And so for me, the resources that are now available because of the technology we have, like infrared sauna, like cold plunge and cold exposure, and being able to utilize those as resources consistently, help me maintain my capacity, my energy, and my focus to continue moving forward. And they're a part of my life on a daily basis.
Fascinating. Yeah, there's so much in that area. I'm just starting to learn a little bit more about red light therapy, and
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating how the body responds to these various things, and the science that is kind of behind that. I'm sort of, my science geek comes out there when I
Yeah,
start to
likewise. I mean, I
study
could go
that.
deep on a variety of those topics. Red light's something I've been
Yeah.
doing for years, and it's something that we teach to a lot of folks in our world because I
Mhm.
genuinely think that it's one of the greatest investments we can make in ourselves.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. The best way to keep a client on track.
Hold them in truth, and
Mm.
and hold them in an objective and non-judgmental way so that their truth can be their guiding factor versus something that they're hiding from.
Hmm. And part of that is what you described in a couple of anecdotes already today as sort of being the model for that.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yep.
All right. And finally, the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves.
Be you and no one else. Stop trying to be
Yeah.
anyone else. Your unique value, all of your greatest gifts, all of your greatest treasures you already have. You were born with many of them, and a lot of them were developed and they're just happen to be hidden and formed by all that trash pressure. Your treasure within is what makes you unique and different.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think owning that trash can lead to something because one person's trash might end up being another person's treasure.
Bingo.
All right. Well, thanks, Brian. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Now, where can people find out more about you and maybe even get in touch and say thanks for what you've shared today?
If you're a web-based person, go to brianbogert.com. It'll give you entry points into all of our world, our podcast, Flipping the Lid, and all of our resources, events, and things we run. If you're on social media, I'm at Bogert Brian on all channels. We absolutely would love to speak with, help, or impact whomever we can, up to and including even if that means we're doing it for free. We are really focused on our impact, and it only happens when people resonate and lean in.
Excellent. And as always, we'll have those links in the show notes, of course. Now, finally, as we wrap it up, Brian, what action would you like the listener to take from our conversation today?
Give yourself permission to explore your current existence and your current life. I just want you to create 2 lists. On one list, I want you to write down all the people, places, source of information, and environments that you go into that feel and leave you uplifted. That you could spend 8 hours there and it felt like 1. You can't wait to get back to see those people, be in that place, do that thing again. I want you to write down everything in your life today that exists on that side of the list. The other list, I want you to write down all the people, places, sources of information, environments that leave you feeling depleted, defeated, unworthy, disconnected. That, man, 1 hour feels like 8 because you're just slamming your head against the wall. You can't wait to avoid those people, avoid those environments, and actually go do something else. Largely, I believe that so many people have both and large degrees of both that exist in their world. But again, they lack the awareness to understand what is on each side of the list. Once the list is created, I want you to go through a systematic process of trying to remove, eliminate, restore, or refine as many things on the negative side of the list as possible and spend as much time over here as you can. That in and of itself, this singular activity and action will align you more deeply with who you already are versus who the world has told you who to be.
That can be a very powerful exercise, I imagine. So I will do that myself and keep you posted.
Beautiful, my friend. Thank you for having me with you today.
Thanks, Brian. I've really enjoyed the conversation and all the best for the future. And please do stay in touch.
We will. Yeah, absolutely.